The Lost Art with Andrew Cox podcast. Marine Corps League and Till Valhalla Project Ambassador. Now streaming on all major podcast platforms. Thanks for tuning in to the podcast that's given a voice to our veterans. The Lost Art with Andrew Cox. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Lost Art Podcast, that podcast giving a voice to our veterans. I'm your host, Andrew Cox, and today we're having a part 2 with Robbie Robinson. But before we get into the episode, are you enjoying the podcast? And make sure you go to the website. That's thelostart.podbean.com. Go check us out, see what we're all about. There's a couple ways you can help support us in getting our veteran voices out for all to hear. Once you get on that website, you can. There's a one-time donation link. You can go ahead and click on that. And then there's a patron link. You can become a patron. That's a monthly donation. Or you can go in there and purchase some cool merchandise. And if you have a business, you can actually advertise right here on the podcast. So there's a couple ways that you can help support us. And anything that you help with would be much appreciated. A big shout out to the Till Valhalla Project out there doing amazing things. If you don't know much about the Till Valhalla Project, or even if you do, go over to their website. They got some amazing stuff, and they have an amazing mission. Anything you do for them would be much appreciated as well. Are you a Marine veteran? Are you missing that bond you had on active duty? Then I have a place for you. Join the only congressionally chartered Marine Corps Veteran Service Organization, the Marine Corps League. Get that brother and sisterhood back in your life. Become one of the fewer, the prouder, a Marine Corps League member. All right, we're back here. We got Robbie. Robbie, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Oh, man, I can't complain. I get to hear more of your story, so it's going to be a good time, I think.
Yeah. So, down here in Tampa, Florida, just enjoying the typical sunshine.
Yeah.
But
I hear it's a little warm and muggy down there.
It can be, and today's one of them. One of those days.
Oh, man.
Thank goodness for air conditioning down here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Man.
Yeah, okay.
Well, if you want to jump back in, we can jump back in where we left off the last time. Totally up to you here.
Yeah. So last time we had just been talking about Edwards Air Force Base and the restricted airspace as the test pilot that we would fly in. So and you'd asked me some interesting questions, and so if you want to go back to the chart, I'll try to answer some of those questions for you. Okay. Yeah, that chart right there. Thanks. Okay. So the question that you'd asked me was, how big is this? How big is this flying airspace? And I looked it up, and the total airspace that's reserved there is 20,000 square miles. Wow. And actually, if you look at the bottom, it says Buckhorn, MOA, that stands for Military Operating Area. And that's about where there's a little town called Rosemont. And I've looked from Rosemont, then if you go straight north up to where it says Bishop MOA, Military Operating Area, that distance up from Rosemont to Bishop is 180 miles, and it's just about a straight shot.
Wow!
So that gives you a pretty good feel from north to south, and at its widest width there, it's probably about the same thing. So yeah, it's a lot of real estate that we use for doing our testing there. So
well, I'd imagine you'd probably need it all.
Yeah, well, clearly we do, and but again, for a lot of the testing that we did at Edwards, that blue area that's called R2515, that's the vast majority of the testing is done, because that's where our spin areas are, that's where our weapons ranges are, and that's where our supersonic corridors are located in that area. Okay, and the other thing is that airspace is reserved from the surface all the way to unlimited, so clear to the moon. So people can fly over it or whatever. Okay, whereas some of the other blocked off areas, they only go up to say 18,000 feet, and they start at 200 feet. And so each area you would need to go in and see, what the lowest altitude is and what the highest altitude is, and
Right.
whether it's or not. But the Edwards restricted airspace itself is that what we call R2515. But when we would take off, we would normally get a clearance that gave us access to just about all of that operating area there that you see, and not only the blue, but also the yellow sections as well.
Wow.
But we typically would go into that right in the middle is R2505, and that was China Lake's restricted airspace. So our clearance did not give us access to China Lake, and it didn't give us access to the National Training Center, which is the R2524 area there. So we would avoid those areas, but the rest of it was basically wherever we needed to go to do our testing. We were have at it kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and it's and again for where you're looking there, you can see to the west, to the left there, that is where the Sierra Mountains are, and so that blocked a lot of the weather. So on when you're on the east side of the Sierras, I mean the weather was usually clear and a million, and so it was outstanding. And again, nobody basically lives out there in Mojave Desert, so you didn't have to worry too much about noise complaints and that kind of thing, particularly when we did sonic booms. And we'll talk a little bit about sonic booms here in just a minute or two. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next chart then.
All right.
Okay, this is the actual God's eye view of Edwards Air Force Base runways themselves. And you can see there's a big old long line there, and that is the primary runway, and that rascal is over 2 miles long.
Oh wow!
And to the right, the very light gray, you can see or tan, whatever, you can see that there's lines in the lake bed. That is a dry lake bed, and for most of the year when it doesn't rain, that is hard as a rock. It's just hard adobe. And what happens is we will occasionally, not often, but we will get rains, and sometimes that lake bed will fill up with water. And but then when it dries, and the evaporation happens, that it evaporates level. Then that sun bakes it, and so it's just like asphalt. So you can land out there, and some of those runways you can see that are kind of lined off. That only be part of the Rogers dry lake bed, and that is so the runways out on that lake bed are over 7 miles long, and so
nice.
So if you can't land on a runway at Edwards on those runways, I used to tell my test pilots who had just graduated that if you can't land on that lake bed, you're in the wrong place. So,
no problem. 7 miles.
Yeah, landing on that thing, because you never know when you're going to need it. I actually needed it 2 different times where I was doing F-16 testing, which only has 1 engine, and the engine's quit, and I was able to do flame out landings right on the lake bed, and save the runway and save myself from a jet and that kind of thing.
Wow.
Okie-doke. So from the runway, and then there's a new runway that's a black strip that's kind of in the middle there, and then to the north of that is there's an area that's where there's some parking and all that, and then there's an area you can see kind of a build-up section that kind of runs north that parallels the edge of the dry lake bed, and you can see some kind of white rectangular buildings. Those are the hangars. Those are the hangars where most of the test aircraft are actually located. And then if you keep on going to the north, that picture is clipped it off. Just to the north of that is where the NASA facilities are located.
Oh wow! Okay.
So NASA Armstrong shares this whole runway and complex with us. So their test aircraft are located just about where where those two circles, I think, was the United States Navy and Space Force. Just between those two there, if you imagine right there, that parking area that would be up there is where NASA used to be NASA Dryden, but now it's called NASA Armstrong. But that whole section from NASA Armstrong down to the parking areas next to the runway, that is what we used to Contractors Row, and that's where all of it, like the F-16s, F-15s, C-17s, all that, they would be located in the hangars that are located right there. So
Okay.
That's kind of a cool picture. And then just below that, there's another small area that you can kind of see. And it's hard to see. You can see that there's a taxiway that goes to the runway. Now, that area is called South Base. And South Base is where the B-2 used to, when I was at Edwards, we had B-2s that would test out of there. So they went off on our own. And then when we brought in some Global Hawk unmanned air vehicles, they were all stationed down there, what we'd call South Base. So it was obviously we've got a lot of aircraft, a lot of different types of aircraft, and so finding parking space for them, hangar space, that sometimes a little tough. But that's just basically where those folks were located. Okay, so any questions about the runway itself and all that?
No, I don't think so. I think I've been tracking on all that.
Yeah, and so to the upper left is, if you kept on going kind of the upper left, that is the main part of the base. And then outside the picture, just about where the Air Force logo is, that's where the housing area, and the base exchange, the hospital, and all that stuff would be located about where, as I'm looking where you and I are and where the Air Force logo is. That'd be the layout of Edwards Air Force Base itself.
Okay.
Okay.
Very cool. Next slide.
Yeah. So now you're an expert on that. Okay. So we talked about last time. We talked about where I went through the test pilot school. And it was year long, curriculum, and studying, in the morning, or then fly in the afternoon for 1 week, and the next week you'd reverse that schedule, and you'd have academics in the afternoon and fly in the morning, kind of thing. When I graduated, there's kind of an interesting story. I had an assignment. I was supposed to go to Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City, Florida. And so my wife and I, we were all excited about, going for the Bobby days. We're going to go down to Florida, we're going to buy a house on the beach, and get a boat, and those wild dreams. Okay. Well, the movers were at my house, AJ. Now imagine the PCS move, where the movers are at your house, and while they're putting boxes on a truck, you get a phone call, which I did. I got a phone call as the commandant of the test pilot school saying, "Hey, Robbie," he says, "we don't know what's going on." He said, "But we think you need to hold your position." I said, "Well, I got people to put boxes on the truck." He says, "Well, tell them to go to lunch." So I said, "Yeah." He said, "Tell them to go to lunch." And he says, "Because I think when they come back from lunch," he says, "we're going to be telling you that you're staying here at Edwards, and your assignment to Florida has been canceled." And sure enough, what had happened was I was supposed to go down to Florida and fly. I was going to be flying the F-106, it's a Delta-shaped aircraft, but the Air Force had decided to retire it, and so they retired all the flying positions. Obviously, got canceled. So that trickled to, okay, that's where I was going to be going. So the commandant called me up and said, "Yeah," he says, "your assignment's canceled, so you're staying at Edwards." Yeah. So so all my my dreams of going to Florida and living on the beach and all that good stuff, that just went poof. And so
now they had to load your stuff back in your house.
Yeah. So I'd tell them, "Okay, guys, now take this, take and take it back in the house." But so here's the interesting thing is that where I was living, the test pilot school had dedicated housing for the students. So they had to take the boxes, take it off the truck, put it in the house, and then my wife and I had to go to the housing office and tell them that we're staying, okay, and for them to find us a house where we would be assigned permanent housing. And so then they had to come back later, take the boxes, put it back on the truck, and then put it over into to where we were, the house that we were going to be living for the next 3 years here at Edwards. That was my integration into being a permanent assignee as opposed to just a student there at the test pilot school at Edwards. So anyway, because they had canceled my assignment at Tyndall, they said, well, we're just going to keep you here. But they had no real assignment for me. But they had a squadron that was called Test Operations, or it was named Test Ops. And that was a squadron where some of the smaller testing programs were being run out of Test Ops. I mean, big programs like the B-1, B-2, F-15, F-16, they had their own dedicated squadron buildings and their own aircraft and all that. And so, if you got assigned to that, you were off on your own. But there were a lot of test programs that were smaller in size, and so the Air Force didn't want to just dedicated resources of pilots and airplanes, and so it was kind of a catch-all squadron, Test Operations, and smaller things. That's where. So I went down there, and so I checked out in the airplane to the left, the camo aircraft. That's called the F-4, and so I was checked out in the F-4. And as a test pilot, I could get dual qualified, which most pilots, you don't get dual qualified. You get checked out in an airplane at a time. But we had T-38s, and so I checked out in both aircraft. And so I was, in the morning I'd fly the F-4, in the afternoon I'd fly the T-38 or whatever. And so some of the programs that I got involved with in the F-4 were really interesting. One of the first ones they assigned me to was called Airborne Laser Program, and it was being operated out of Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I'll show you a picture of the airborne laser in just a minute. So they would give me this airplane, and the F-4 had a special modification. You can't see it here, but it had underneath the belly of the aircraft, it had a cradle, and it had an air vehicle that was attached to a big long cable, and we would release it, and we basically tow it, and then the airborne laser would shoot at that target, and then we'd reel it back in, and then we'd land, and then the engineers would evaluate how well the laser worked as far as being able to hit that target. So we'd take the F-4, we'd go down to Albuquerque, and we'd stay down there for about a week, and we'd take off, and we'd orbit around one area, and the airborne laser, he would then lock into us and hopefully lock onto the target that we were towing and not us.
Right.
When he shot the laser. And that was back in 1983, 84 timeframe. So,
wow.
Yeah, we've been doing airborne laser work for a long time. And,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I can't go into just how accurate it was, but let me tell you, it was very accurate as far as the turret and it being able to lock on to the target. And interestingly enough, the target shape looked a whole lot like a cruise missile.
Oh, really?
Okay. The shape of it that we carried, it looked like a cruise missile when it was towed behind us. And yeah, they were able to poke holes in it pretty good. So that was a lot of fun doing that. Now the other thing, the second bullet there, speaking of cruise missiles, this is at the same, when I graduated was the same time that the Air Force was trying to go operational with cruise missiles that you see, today. I mean, that you operating during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and all that stuff, right? We still use it. In fact, the latest attacks on Iran, we launched a bunch of cruise missiles. So what they would do is they would, again, for the testing, a lot of the testing was done up in other range that, was similar to our restricted airspace that we talked about earlier.
Right.
Well, there's similar airspace up in Utah called Utah Test and Training Range. And so we 4 ship of F4s, the camoed aircraft, and we'd take off from Edwards sometimes, before even the sun would come up, and we'd fly up as a 4 ship, go up to Utah, and we rejoin on a B-52. So we're flying off the wing of a B-52, and they would launch a cruise missile. And the cruise missile would go down, and 2 of us would go down, and we would act as safety chases. And then the other 2 guys would stay up, and they would rejoin on a tanker, and they would stay topped up while the 2 guys were down. We were basically flying formation, with a cruise missile called Pac-Man, because he'd fly along and kind of nibble around as he's doing his thing. And so we were flying formation with cruise missiles back in 1983, unmanned, and we would have the route maps with us. And so we knew where he was going, and we had a black box in the back seat of these F4s. And if it started straying off course and was heading for like Salt Lake City, and you thought I was going to crash in Salt Lake, you could take control of it, and then fly it get it back into the Utah Test and Training Range, and you could terminate it. Now, if you got it back, but it was a one-way thing. Once you took control, you could not say, okay, now you're back on course. There you go.
Oh, yeah.
So they were very, so we were very reluctant to actually take control unless it's absolutely necessary. But anyway, let me just say that in the early days of cruise missile testing, I witnessed more than one of those vehicles hit the ground.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So we were testing not only with the air cruise missiles, but the sea launched cruise missiles, as well as so we had the ground launched cruise missiles we called the Glickums, the Slickums, the sea launch, and then the Alcoms, air launched cruise missiles. So we spent a lot of time flying up to Utah, rejoining with these Pac-Man, fly with them for about 4 hours, and then they would finally terminate them there in the test range, and then a helicopter would come out and pick them up and then take them back and dust them off and do whatever. And so I was spending a lot of time doing this cruise missile testing when I wasn't doing the airborne testing as well. But in addition, when you do testing, let's say you're doing F-15, F-16, F-22, a lot of your testing where you're either going to need a safety chase, where a guy is just sitting on the wings looking, just acting as a safety observer and just making sure that nobody else is flying in,
Right.
And then if something actually breaks, because it is a new airplane, something might, not work as it's supposed to, then you can come in and you can do a visual observation and then make recommendations as far as what the test aircraft needs to do. So photo and safety chase, I was doing a lot of that, and so this is the Harrier, the Marine Corps Harrier. It was testing out there as well. So I was doing a lot of safety chase with the Harrier, which was interesting because that Harrier, I mean, he could just turn on a dime. Well, that F4, I mean, yeah, he could turn, but I mean, it took half a state for it to do a turn. So what I had to learn to do was, instead of operating on horizontal turns, I would go up and down while he was doing some of his maneuvers, and so I could keep him in sight just by going up and down and keep him in sight that way. So yeah, how you actually maneuvered the F4 to stay with a more maneuverable aircraft was an interesting challenge sometimes.
Wow.
Then I got assigned to a program for F-111 avionics modernization program, and NASA was doing what's called a mission adaptive wing, where they were taking an F-111 and completely changing the wing. Now, we showed you last time the F-111. I've got another picture that I'll show you in a minute, but it was actually going to take the wing, and not only did the wing sweep back or forward like I showed you before, but you could also warp the wing. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And change the lift by warping the wing itself, which, I mean, that was crazy stuff. But that was a program I got involved with just very quickly. And then after that, then they moved me down to the F-16. And so then I got involved in being part of that big program of the F-16, which we'll spend a lot more time talking about in a minute.
Yeah.
One of my additional duties, I guess, was I also was assigned as the Air Force Flight Test Center representative to NASA, because this is the same time that we were doing space shuttle landing tests. So they would launch them from Cape Canaveral, and then they'd do orbits. And when they would come in, they would land. They'd always land at Edwards. And so when they would do the launch, then I would go down to NASA and go into the control room. And my job was to coordinate all of the Air Force resources, whether it's medical personnel, helicopters, navigation aids that they needed, and if they had other bases where they would have what was an abort once around, if they couldn't get into orbit, so they might need to land at some other place like White Sands or whatever. So I was supposed to be responsible for checking on their status and then relaying that to NASA. So I was doing that for several.
That's a really interesting thing, though. Not many people in the world has got to see any of that live. And you were there dealing with it,
I was right into control. So I was one of those guys, headsets on in the control room, and say go, go, Air Force go kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I like it.
Then the other program that I was working on, which there's some interesting word. There's a very interesting war story on this last bullet. President's Nuclear Stockpile Improvement Program. And there's a bomb called the B-61, which is now making the headlines because of what's going on in Russia. And so we're talking about reactivating our nuclear capabilities, weapons, and the latest news that I saw was the Air Force just sent B-61s to my old base at RAF Lakenheath in England, where I used to, where I was previously stationed.
Yeah.
Well, so what we do is we will take these B-61s, we'll take them out of the inventory, some of them out of the inventory, and they'll take what I affectionately call, we'll take the nut out of the chewy. I mean, we'll take the actual, material, the explosive material, but the rest of the hardware and electronics, they'll keep them. And then the Department of Energy wants to do testing. So they'll say, okay, yeah, we want to test this thing, at Mach 1.23, or, we want to slam it in a bunch of telephone poles, just to see how they work over the years, and whether anything, tends to decay or, erode or whatever over the years. Because obviously, hopefully we never use these things, right?
Yeah.
But they
absolutely.
also make sure that if they ever do need to pull them out of the stockpile, that they actually work as advertised. So again, they'll grab some, just at a random, okay, go take that guy, test it. And so I got the straw to go fly this F4 and go over to Tonopah Test Range, which is Edwards, going northeast, go across the Nevada, California line, and go in there. And they had me drop this B-61 at Mach 1.23 at 100 feet. So, so it was, and the key point that I want to relay is that before you do any testing, you always have a technical and you always do a safety review board, and they will do an analysis on whether it's low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And obviously at that speed and that altitude, that was considered a high risk test. So now what I had to do is I had to go up to the center commander, who was a 2-star general, and I had to brief him on what I was going to be doing, how I was going to be doing it, and all that. And so when I got to briefing him on the test, he looks at me and he says, "Oh, Robbie," he says, "have you ever dropped a bomb at that altitude and that airspeed?" Which I said, "No, sir, I haven't." And he says, "Well, then," he says, "this is what I want you to do." He says, "I can't believe he told me this." He says, I want you to go out and fly a practice run to make sure you're comfortable with that altitude and airspeed. I'm thinking, oh, really? So I go back to test op squadron. And I said, hey, you got to schedule me an F4 before the date that I was supposed to drop this, go drop this, the actual weapon over in Tonopah. I said, so I blocked off the low altitude supersonic corridor. So I took off, and the low altitude supersonic corridor. I mean, on a map that I showed you the primary runway and then south base. And then if you kept going off the page to the south, that's where the subsonics, or that's where the low altitude supersonic corridor was. Literally, I just took off, just climbed up, just made a left-hand turn, climbed up, and then did the profile to get to that altitude, to get to 100 feet at Mach 1.23. I had to start up at like 20,000 feet, put the nose almost straight down, put it in full afterburner, and then when I hit the red line, then just keep so that I didn't go, past the red line on the airplane, and just stay at that Mach 1.23 until leveled off at 100 feet, and then went scorched across the desert at 100 feet, just to feel what it was like. Well, let me tell you, when you get to that altitude and that airspeed, you just can't believe how difficult it is for your hand to go forward, to go from 110 feet, push the stick forward to get down to 100 feet. I mean, things are going by so quickly for starters. And I had a guy in the back seat. Our biggest concern wasn't really hitting the ground; it was hitting the bird. I mean, if we would hit a bird that we joked about, it would have gone through the front canopy. It would have gone through my head, the ejection seat. The other guy had his ejection seat and probably went out the back, the tail of the airplane. So yeah, I mean, that was our biggest concern, was making sure there weren't any birds in the area. So I go streaking along 100 feet, and then I just pretended, okay, about here's where we'd hit the pickle button, drop the bomb. So after we pretended like we hit the bomb, because we didn't have any bombs on it in the practice run. So then I just did a vertical, did a vertical climb up, then rolled the airplane inverted, and then rolled it wings level, and then flew back the other way. And then what we call a split S, where I was going along, rolled inverted, and then pulled back down and did a second run. I was planning to do a second run identical to the first one. Yeah. So I'm streaking along what I thought was the same line, and I'm looking out, and I cannot believe what I'm seeing. It looks like this black line that's through the desert. And I'm going, where'd that come from? And so I'm the guy in the back seat, his name is Terry, and I said, hey, Terry, do you see what I'm seeing? I says, what is that? What black streak in front of us? And he says, I think that is the residual shock wave being at 100 feet. And so literally it was like a blowtorch went right across the desert. And so we did another blowtorch line right next to the first one, did a second maneuver, then came back and did a third one, and did three blowtorches right across the desert. And then by then we were out of gas, so then we slowed down. Then I made the left-hand turn, turned back, landed on the runway, taxied in. And as we were taxiing in and we were looking off to where we had just been flying, you could see these little horizontal tornadoes that were still just above the desert floor. Wow. So when they talk about the shock wave and all that, yeah, when you get out of that altitude and you're going that fast, there's a lot of energy being impacted in that surrounding area.
That is insane.
To me, and so here the second part of the story is, a few days later, I am scheduled to go through land survival training. Well, the land survival training school was right next to that low altitude supersonic corridor. Okay, well, fine. So I drive out to the school and I go in, and when you go into that school, and they teach you how to, land in a parachute, land in the desert, and then, how to survive and, all the stuff. And so you have to go through that training every couple of years. And so but they had these glass cages. Okay? They have these glass cages, and in there they have all these rattlesnakes, and tarantulas and all these critters. Okay,
Yeah.
that you be sharing real estate that you had checked out in the Mojave Desert. Some of those glass cases were cracked.
Ooh.
Okay, glass cases were cracked. And so I'm walking, and I see these in the hallway. Here's these, these critters in these glasses, glass cages. And so I asked one of the guys, I said, "Why are these glasses cracked?" He says, "Oh man," he says, "a couple of days ago," he says, "this airplane went scorching out there going supersonic, and the sonic boom cracked the glass."
Wow, that was you.
And that was me. Yeah. So I kind of went, "Oh, really? Gee whiz." Sorry to hear about that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to tell him, well, that was me. It was me.
Yeah.
It was me.
That's
So
wild.
yeah. So I ended up almost releasing rattlesnakes at the land survival school.
Yeah, that could have been bad.
Can you imagine sitting there and suddenly there's rattlesnakes around?
All of a sudden, here comes the rattlesnake.
Yeah. Whoa. Thank
that'd
goodness.
be a little scary.
But I'm gonna hold that thought about the sonic booms and what they can do at Edwards. Okay, so now I'm done doing test op stuff, and so then I finally get assigned down to the F-16. So I think the next slide. Oh no, okay. So here's the pictures. Yeah. So upper left, that airplane that looks like a 707 or whatever. That is the airborne laser, and you can see that there's a turret and fairing on the top of the airplane. That is where the actual laser and turret was, so that they could slew around and fire at the targets. And so that was a very successful program. And so after that program, the Air Force decided, we're going to try to operationalize that. And they decided to go with a much bigger laser, and they were going to put it on a 747. But unfortunately, the new laser in the airplane and all that was just that was supposed to happen in about the 1999 time frame, and they just couldn't get it. They just couldn't get it to operationalize at time.
Yeah.
Now, what's happened since then, I don't know. But that's just where that is. And then the upper right, you can see that's one of the cruise missiles that we used to fly. And there's a picture of, just flying formation. You can almost reach out and touch the darn thing. And you can see it's the mountain range there. That's part of the mountain range there in Utah. And then the lower.
I didn't realize how big that cruise missile is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good Lord. It flies subsonic, but it can go a long ways. And so it's and those wings, the wings stay in. The wings kind of, when it's flying on the B-52, the wings are tucked in, and so after it gets released, then the engine lights. It's a jet engine. The engine lights and the wings will pop out, and then it kind of dithers around a bit to get its bearings, and then it'll just kind of pitch over and start heading towards the ground. Then it flies at a certain altitude. I'm not going to talk about, from an operational perspective, how long it goes, whatever. But you've seen pictures of people taking pictures of them flying by. So yes. So that's the cruise missile testing we did. And then to the lower left, that is the white. That is an AFTI Advanced Fighter Technology Integration Program, and that is the airplane that had the warped wing capability. That they had some kind of a mechanism in there and obviously it wasn't metal to the top of the wing, and that they could then rotate something that would actually warp the wing, cause the camber to shift.
All right.
So that was an interesting program. And then in the lower right, that bomb with the bright orange, that is a B-61, and that's hitting the target
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. So that's a Mach 1.23 hitting the target.
Holy cow. That is
Yeah.
pretty cool. Man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
So
you've definitely
that's
seen some cool stuff over the years.
yeah. Yeah. So that was that's those programs. And then so I really enjoyed being there at Test Ops, even though I was first bummed out. My assignment to Tyndall had been canceled.
Yeah.
In fact, I was able to get involved in some of these other programs. It was so much fun that I mean, it's every day was in like a day in Disneyland almost.
Yeah.
Uh, so here's some of the pictures. The way that we do testing, you do what's called the build-up technique. Okay, and so you go, what is the safest thing to do? Well, to the space shuttle, since it's coming in, it's out, and when it actually goes into, say, space, it's doing Mach 25. Okay, and then it's got to come in, and then it's got to slow down, and then it's got to land, and it has no engine. So I mean, when it's coming down, when it comes down, wherever it's planning to go, that is where it has to go. It has no engine, so it is not like it's going to go, well, I'll just divert and go over here, I'll go over there. So that program, when they made that decision, okay, that they're going to descend and come back in for landing, they had to make darn sure the place they're going to was acceptable, just due to the orbital mechanics involved in flying that airplane, that spacecraft, I guess you want to call it. And so the second picture, you can see the space shuttle, and you can see two T-38s. And I was talking about safety chase and photo chase stuff. So you can see there they are. And so the first guy, what he's doing is he's reading off the approximate altitude to give the space shuttle pilots at that time a good feel for how far they are off the runway. Okay, you're 20 feet, you're 10, that kind of thing. All right. And then after they did the landing on the lake bed, and they would stop on the lake bed, and then they'd go out with a tug and they'd go back to the NASA area, and then they would made it back up to the 747, which you can see down in the lower left-hand picture. They had a mating capability there where they would hoist it up, tow in a 747, plop it on the top of the 747, then they fly from California all the way down to Cape Canaveral again, and reload. Yeah, so after the buildup of we're comfortable that we've got everything down as far as land, how to land it, and we're sure it's everything's working correctly. Then the next buildup is now we're going to land on the hard surface. So then they did some of the tests where they actually landed that. You can see a picture of it actually landing on the concrete there.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, you can see just past that, you can see at left hand to the left wing, there's a T-38, and he's acting as a safety chase. Okay. While they're landing on the hard surface there. So then after now we're comfortable landing on the runway during the day, then let's do the night landings, okay? And now we're back to the dry runway, and then to the lake bed, and then to the hard surface. And then after they got comfortable with the actual landing sequence and everything associated with that, then they didn't need to use Edwards anymore. So then they started landing at Cape Canaveral, and there's no need for that mating capability in the 747. So that was sometime later on. But that's just shows you that to me is a good picture to show part of the build-up process that you use, regardless of whether you're testing for NASA or whether you're testing for the Air Force or the Navy or Army. That's the general process you go through. Okay.
Now every time, so they land on the lake bed during the day, then they do it on the runway. And then the same thing at night. So that's 4 different tests that you're doing. And each time they're flying it to Cape Canaveral, shooting it up into space again, and then basically just doing it over.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. Because the space shuttle has no engine. So the only way you can, you couldn't launch it from Edwards. So you had to take it back to Cape Canaveral, launch
Yeah.
it, and go through and I don't think that they just would launch it and then just bring it into landing. They would go up and they would do orbital testing and maneuvers and whatnot.
Right.
Then when they were ready to bring it in, then they would say, okay, this landing is still going to be on the lake bed, and then the building from lake bed to hard surface, etc. Well, when they were doing the landings, that lake bed, like I say, is like 7 miles long. Well, it's kind of they would get all these night lights, floodlights, to kind of light up the landing area for them to land at night, but which was kind of interesting. And on the east shore of the lake bed, they had parking areas, and there would be people that would park there with their campers, and their cameras.
Oh,
and
really?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a small city. When they found out that the shuttle was coming in for landing, I mean, that whole area would just be packed with people to be there to watch it, observe it. Yeah,
I mean, it's a cool thing. It's a cool thing to see, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, well, it was. Now, and it happened fast. So the first thing you do is you hear a double boom, sonic boom, boom, boom. Okay. Now, what that was the shock waves coming first off of the nose, but not only the nose, but then the rudder, the top of the rudder, caused another shock wave. And so you would hear this boom, boom, and that told you that the space shuttle was directly over the top, and he was doing his basically dead stick maneuver to come over and then kind of do a big turn and then basically point the nose almost straight down and come down and to the runway and then flat and land.
Oh, jeez.
So I mean, so if you were asleep at the wheel, you would miss it, because when he came down, he came down fast. Then he would slow down, as he got closer, and then he would land, and then he had a drag chute to help him stop also.
Wow. So they're coming in fairly quick then.
Yeah. Well, but they are subsonic, obviously. But they have to go from like Mach 25 to slow down to less than 200 miles an hour. I guess on final approach, and then they would transition. So landing speed, I think, was probably around 150 miles an hour, maybe a little bit more. I don't know.
Wow.
But again, I can't stress enough, when you don't have an engine, there's no room for error.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You got to know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, and so a lot of it was automated, and they had a lot of steering cues and all that to help them out. But some of my classmates from test pilot school one guy became a shuttle pilot, the other guy became a mission specialist in the back of the space shuttle.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. So I went to some of their launches and landings and all that over the years. Yeah, that was kind of cool. Okay, doke. So I guess enough on that. What's like? Okay, yeah. So now after I do these space shuttle stuff, and I do chasing cruise missiles and getting shot by airborne lasers and all that, they assigned me to the F-16. So I go down and they made me the chief pilot for propulsion and subsystems testing. So, and the subsystems would be like the air, ECS, environmental control systems, the hydraulics, the electrics, braking systems, all of that. Because we also had navigation systems, we had radar systems, and so we had people that were focused on a lot of that testing. My job was to do primarily the engine testing. And when just as I show up, the Air Force decides that they want to do what they call the Great Engine War, which was a competition between two of the primary engine contractors, Whitney and General Electric. And what they were going to do is they were going to compete the engines on a yearly basis, because we were going to buy over 2,000 F-16s. And so I guess just to kind of spread the wealth, they decided, okay, well, we're going to do these, we'll do these competitions. And so they wanted to evaluate Pratt & Whitney's engine, because Pratt & Whitney had come up with an upgraded engine to what was already in early versions. and it was called the 220. And then General Electric came up with a new engine called the F-110. And so I became the guy who was, I guess, the point man for this great engine war. So I was checked out in both flying the Pratt & Whitney engines and the General Electric engines, which was really a lot of fun. But they were also doing this block upgrade, and so I'm gonna show you some pictures to talk about block upgrades in a minute. But when you look at an F-16 or you look at any aircraft, when you look at it from the outside, it looks the same. But when you get into the cockpit, a lot of times you're going to see completely different airplanes because of different blocks of what's in, the avionics, or what's the radar, or what's, whatever. Sometimes the upgrade might be the engine itself. So I was involved in doing a lot of and when you put new systems in there, you got to make sure that they're structurally going to be able to handle 9Gs and all that. And then there was this other program that came along just about that same time frame that was called GPS. Now, today ubiquitous, right? But back in 1984, nobody knew what GPS was.
Yeah.
Nobody knew.
It was brand new.
Yeah, well, and at the time, there were only 4 GPS satellites in the sky.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are only 4. Now, the other thing about those satellites is they are not in geosynchronous orbits where they stay in the same place in the sky. Okay. They were orbiting around. And so there are only certain times of the day when you're going to be able to pick up the signals. So we were doing the GPS testing and the integration of how well our avionics were able to pick up the signals and then integrate those signals into navigation, for just basically navigating or dropping bombs or whatever. There were only certain times of the day. Sometimes that is 2 a.m.
Okay.
Sometimes 10 o'clock at night. So so when we were testing, you can only test when we could actually see, and so we had the schedule of when the windows of opportunity, and so sometimes you get I got the 2 a.m. test missions where we take off from Edwards and we'd fly down to Yuma, Arizona, because there was a bombing range down there that we were using, taking the signals from the GPS and then seeing how well the bombing worked. And then we would do simulated landings on the runway and all of that. And then the last thing we would do is, after we dropped all the bombs off, we do these and we do high G maneuvers to see whether we would break lock. And then we would turn our inertial navigation system off in the aircraft. And then we just fly straight and level and then see whether you could actually get the GPS signal to help realign your inertial navigation system on the airplane.
Wow.
And
okay.
That we couldn't get that to work for a long time. And you're looking at the guy who finally do the nut, because test pilot, all you did is you turned it off, you turned it on, and then there was this thing called a figure of merit in the head-up display. And if it was like a 99, that says terrible signal. Well, if it went on, if it started marching down to much lower numbers, it says, yeah, you're getting a much more accurate signal. Well, turn it off, turn it on. And of course, your attitude indicator was based on the INS. Your navigation system was based on the INS. So that was the last maneuver you did, because if you couldn't get the INS, or if you couldn't get the INS realigned from GPS, you could fly back basically on a little peanut attitude indicator and a TACAN signal, fly back to Edwards Air Force Base. And I can't tell you how many times I was flying back to Edwards just on a little peanut standby attitude indicator.
Wow.
Because we couldn't get the GPS to upgrade.
That's wild.
So finally, one day, or one evening, actually, I turned it off, turned it on, and I was thinking, okay, figure of merit numbers, it's not going to come down, and okay, I'm going to have to go back, contact air traffic control and try to get radar vectors back Edwards. And oh man, the number came down out of 99, 86, 75, and so I'm kind of relaying that to, while I'm up there, it's instrumented. And I had a hot mic capability to talk to people on the ground in the control room. So there were two frequencies. One of them was with air traffic control. The other one was to the engineers on the ground. And so I started reading what I was seeing in the head-up display, and boom, I got my INS to realign. That was the first time. And, of course, there was all the cheering and clapping down in the control room about, yeah. Well, I can't take,
Wow.
I just happened to be the guy that flew with that particular software upgrade where they solved the problem. So that's
right. Yeah. And that's really all it takes, is just trial and error, doing it over and over and over until somebody figures out what it is and is able to fix it.
Yeah, well, that's what development's all about. You go out, you think it works, you try it, it doesn't work. Oh, crap. Okay. And that's why you always had the technical and safety review boards where they would always ask questions. Well, what if? Okay.
Yeah.
So what if you can't get your INS to realign? Well, okay, that means I got to make sure that my standby attitude indicator is working, and I got to make sure, that I've got enough gas to get back, et cetera, et cetera. And so let me just put. So you always had these mitigating procedures that you had to understand what those mitigating procedures were in case something didn't work as advertised. So that was a lot of fun. And then I got involved in what was called the Block 30 engine operability. Okay. And that Block 30 aircraft was a new variant of the F-16. And I got assigned to be the first guy to fly the Block 30. So I went down to the manufacturer facility in Dallas, Texas, signed for the aircraft. And I flew down in an F-16, a two-seater F-16, and the other F-16 guy became a NASA shuttle pilot. So when I flew back, Don McMonagle was my wingman, my safety chase as we flew back to Edwards in case something happened. Yeah. And then we also did FMS stands for Foreign Military Sales. And Egypt and Israel were buying the F-16, so we were testing the aircraft as well. So I had responsibility for those airplanes also. Okay, so let's take a look. I think we've got some pictures now to show you.
All right. Well,
okay. Okay, so probably most people are not familiar with the F-16 itself, but it's a single-engine aircraft, single seat, multi-role fighter. It was originally designed as an air superiority fighter, but it evolved to all-weather multi-role capability. Throughout the world, I think there's over 4,600 of them built. Okay.
Wow.
The cool thing about that airplane is it had a frameless bubble canopy. So when you sat in it, you didn't have to worry about that canopy bow that you see in a lot of airplanes. I mean, it literally, when you got in it, you could look completely around. The visibility was outstanding. And the ejection seat was tilted back, had about a 30-degree incline. Now, why did they do that? Instead of sitting straight up, you kind of sat tilted back like in a rocking chair. And that was because that airplane, you could pull 9Gs just like that. And unfortunately, that capability blacked some pilots out, which resulted in them, not being able to control the aircraft, and the aircraft flew into the ground.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That 9G capability ended up killing several pilots over the years. But what they tried to do.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You got to be in some really good shape to be able to handle those G's like that. Correct?
Oh, let me tell you, when your head weighs 9 times what it does just sitting here. Yeah, you gotta have some pretty strong neck muscles, and so they built the ejection seat with a tilt, and the reason they did that is because they wanted to help with the blackout problem, and by tilting your head up here to your heart distance was a little bit shorter, okay, and that is one of the factors as far as blacking out is the distance from your head to your heart. So if you're hitting straight up, that vertical distance is more than if you're tilted back. Well, if you're laying on the ground, obviously, your head and heart is, it's the same level, right?
Right.
So tilting it back, they determined that that would help pilots be able to deal with the 9Gs without backing out. So that was their thinking, but unfortunately, some people still couldn't handle the Gs. Instead of a normal stick, like you see in the cockpit, it's something a stick between your legs. This was on the side of the to the side of the ejection seat. So when you flew, here's my two hands, and instead of the stick being here and the throttle being over here, the throttle was still over here, but you just sat here like I'm sitting. This is how you fly. And so you had a side stick controller that did not move. It was pressure only. And after you got used to that, AJ, it was like flight by thought. Where you could just look and your hand would put the pressure on the stick and that airplane would just go in the direction you needed to go. It was so much fun to fly. Let me tell you.
I didn't realize that. You're saying the stick itself doesn't move. It's just sensing the pressure of your hand, whichever direction or however you're doing it.
It just senses the pressure in your hand. The problem was when pilots like me, new guys, would get in it, and you pull as many G's as you can, you would the stick didn't move, and so you're pulling. Well, you were pulling more than you needed to, okay? Because you really didn't have that feedback mechanism like you do when you have a regular stick or like a steering wheel. Now imagine in a car, and all you did is put pressure, and the car would turn to the left or turn to the right, but there was no tactical feel. I mean, because nothing was moving. Yeah. So they put just a teeny little bit of motion. I mean, like a quarter of an inch motion in all directions, just so the pilot could get a little bit of tactical feel that, the stick is in fact moving. And your brain, I guess, over time kind of translates as far as how much it really needs to move the stick according to what you need to be doing. But when you get in a combat situation, bang, bang, you're gonna be banging the stick regardless. So that side.
That brings up a question I have then, because you've been in many different platforms, aircraft platforms at this point. How, what is the transition for you as you're going from one aircraft to the other? How does that work?
I mean, how does it work as far as you get used to the airplane and its
flight quality? Is there a process that you have to, get a check ride or anything like that in the new aircraft, or how does that work?
Yeah. So and that goes back to when I said a lot of people, when I first got to test ops, I checked out both in the T-38 and the F-16, and I was dual qualified. Right. You've got to go through a training program with an instructor pilot to demonstrate that that you can in fact fly those airplanes. You didn't just go get in the airplane and go fly. You had to go through a check ride to go through different maneuvers to show that you can safely take off and do instrument approaches and all that in both types of aircraft. And then silly me, when I got in the F-16, I decided to stay current in those other aircraft as well. So I was taking 3 check rides a year. That is
okay.
But I was enjoying what I was doing flying in all 3 types of aircraft.
Yeah.
And there were maybe 2 or 3 of us at Edwards that were what we call triple current. Everybody else was either single or maybe double current. But you have to demonstrate proficiency in aircraft, that you go fly. Unless it's the first.
Like for you personally, how difficult was it to go from one to the next? Is it fairly, I would assume they're pretty close, but small changes or something?
In fighter aircraft, it was pretty easy. If you transition, say when I went to fly, say the KC-135, big tank aircraft. And I talked about last time flying qualities. Okay, you put an input in, and how responsive that aircraft is. It is something that you got to learn. Because not all aircraft have the same response time, and so you put a motion in say a big aircraft, and then it goes, I'm thinking about it, and then it finally does it. Okay. So you've got to anticipate that. So you put something in, and then you've got to say, oh, take it out, because about the time you're ready, if you leave it in, then once you see it starts to go, then if you try to take out at that point, it'll do more than what you commanded to do. So these older aircraft in particular, you had to do what I call nibbling, which is I'll put in a response and I'll take it out, and then I'll see what happens, and I'll put in a little bit more, as needed.
Okay.
To prevent from over controlling the aircraft. Well, when you go from an aircraft where you have, say, the F4 and the 38, where you had control sticks, and now you're going to an airplane where nothing moves, that took a little bit, to learn how to basically handle that.
Retrain your brain, basically.
Yeah, you got to retrain your brain. So when I'd fly the F4, okay, the F4, those engines were very responsive. You can slam those engines forward and back. They're turbojet engines, and they Timex machine, they could take a licking and keep on ticking. But the stick, when you got to angle of attack in that airplane, you in that airplane in particular, if you tried to roll left when you got the angle of attack and you wanted to go left and you moved the stick left, instead of the airplane going left, it would roll right due to adverse yaw. And so, literally, you wanted to go left, and if you moved the stick left, it would snap off to the right. And so when you got the high angle attack, if you wanted to do a roll to the left, what you would do is you keep the stick centered, and then you'd bleed in rudder, and you do kind of a rudder roll. Okay, so
I see. Okay,
you kind of do a rudder roll, and so the aircraft, as I was talking about doing chase, cruise, or chase against the Harriers. When he would do his man maneuvers, I had to get the high angle of attack. If I had, that stick would be centered, and then you just kind of, just lead in a little bit of rudder, and the airplane would roll. And you could do some really nice slow rolls in the core, but you were not doing it. You were not doing it with stick. You were doing it with high angle attack or just rudder only. So you had to learn. You had to learn those peculiarities as part of your process. They give you, handling qualities, familiarity, and give you demonstrations on. Okay, now get up to this. When you start getting the high angles of attack, this is what you need to do. And any good guy who was in the back seat, when he see you're getting a high angle attack, his legs would just get narrow to keep the guy in the front seat to keep from moving. So
Okay.
Into his legs, whether it was.
I like that. That's pretty smart, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, that was just something you just learned based on that airplane. So when I got it, so I was flying the F4, I'd say, okay, left hand you can do what you want, right hand you got to be careful. Well, then when I was in the F-16 with the side stick controller, you could do anything with the airplane without getting it to stall. But when you got the high angles of attack or high altitude in the engine, you had to be careful with early aircraft, the original Pratt & Whitney engine. If you try to slam it in afterburner at high angle attack at high altitudes and slow speeds, you'd get what's called a burner blowout, with boom, and or a compressor stalls, and not good stuff would happen. So they don't have it anymore but in the early days of the F-16, they had what's called Region 1, Region 2, and Region 3. In Region 1, you could do anything you want, but when you got to Region 2, you had to be very careful, and Region 3, very, very careful as far as how you operated the engine. But again, what you did with the side stick controller, even 50,000 feet, the airplane said, yeah, I know what I'm doing. So, like I said, I'd get in one airplane, I'd say, okay, you're okay, you got to be careful. And get in the other plane, I got to tell you what to do.
I don't know. It'd be very confusing for me But I mean, I guess if you do it so much, I mean, I guess it becomes second nature eventually. So,
well, yeah, I mean, it's just like anything, you know, if you, and that gets into how often you fly the airplane.
right.
And you know, if you fly the airplane often, it becomes almost second nature to you, where you don't even think about it. You just your body just does it. Okay.
Right.
But if you're sitting on your butt for a long time and then you get in the airplane, you only fly maybe once or twice a month. Now you're going to be unsafe to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the reason why people ask me, well, do you fly today? And the answer is no, I don't, because I can't fly off enough to be proficient. And so
Right.
I'm not about to go out and do something stupid. I've had too many of my friends who have, in fact, killed themselves in aircraft on, you know, on perfectly good airplanes, but just did something, you know, you look back on it, pile of air.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at some pictures of the airplane. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. So here's the F-16. You can see that bubble canopy.
Yeah.
And how you look around. In fact, one of the most fascinating things that I want to tell you about AJ. So I was flying at altitude, and I was cruising, you know, heading up north in our flying airspace up towards Bishop, and I was up maybe 25, 30,000 feet, and I was just, you know, cruising around. And I decided to look back, and when I looked back behind me, I could see I was contrailing, and typically, you know, when you're in a jet aircraft, you can't see the tail of the airplane, so you don't know whether you're conning or not. But I was able to look.
Real quick, what are you saying? You were doing what?
I was generating contrails. When you get to certain altitude, the exhaust that comes out will sometimes form little white clouds or streaks that you see through the air.
Right.
Those are called contrails. But it doesn't happen all the time. You just have to have certain atmospheric conditions, temperature, humidity, and all of that form the contrails. So sometimes you can, and sometimes, you know, they won't form. So I just happened to look back, and I see the contrail, but I could see it coming out of the exhaust, and it was so fascinating to see how fast that air was coming out of the exhaust and swirling around and forming the contrail behind me. I almost got mesmerized looking backwards as I'm flying straight ahead. I'm looking at the contrail that I'm forming. I'm just going, I've never seen this before. You know, it was just it was one of those phenomena that you know, I'd never seen it. Well, this is cool.
And that's unique to that aircraft, though, to be able to see back there like that, right?
I can't think of another airplane that has the capability of being able to look, you know, directly 180 degrees behind you and be able to see, you know, that. I mean, like the F4, you know, if you look, you got the ejection seat, but you've got the guy behind you, and no, you can't. The F-111 certainly you couldn't see behind. T-38, same thing. You just don't. The fact that you're raised up enough and that bubble canopy gives you the ability to look unrestrained to look behind you. That's one of the reasons why people love the F-16 so much is that the ability on the airplane. I mean, it's fantastic. And so you can see, okay, it's and you just got one engine there. Okay. All right. Now next chart. Okay, so this is a variant of the F-16. And so when we talk about modifications, this was a modification that was made to the F-16. The Air Force decided they wanted to do this new program that they called the dual role fighter. And so General Dynamics at the time, who was building the F-16, said, okay, we're going to build the F-16 XL, which is this delta wing, you know, completely different. And it had a GE engine. Okay, it had a GE engine. So we built two of these airplanes, and it did a fly off against modified F-15s. So you had F-15s modified against these modified F-16s, and they were doing this fly off competition for the dual role fighter program. And the Air Force then selected to the F-15. So these airplanes just kind of got retired as a result of that. But when I got selected to be the pilot to fly his first Block 30 F-16 with the GE engine, the safety review board said, okay, they wanted me to get a couple flights in an F-16 to understand the engine operability. So we had an F-16, so I just went, basically, okay, got an airplane and flew a couple missions just to understand some of the basic differences, because the way it operated, the way it started was completely different than the way you did that with the engine.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah, that was my preparations for the F-110. Is like I said, all the things they said you got to do before you get that first flight. So I had to fly that. Then I had to go down to Tullahoma, Tennessee, where they do wind tunnel testing, and I talked with the engineers down there about how the engine operated. And then, of course, I went back and talked with the General Electric. Has a facility where they built these things in outside of Cincinnati. So, I did a lot of homework before I ever got into that F-16 and flew it from Dallas back to Edwards. So that's just kind of again, you don't just get in an airplane, kick the tire, and say, let's see what this baby will do. There's you got to do in advance before they let you get in an airplane for the first time and fly it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can understand why they would do that. Now, and this is the aircraft that you said you went down and picked up and flew back, correct?
Yeah. Well, go to the next picture, I think. Let's see.
All right. I think I got to pull up this other slide.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the Block 30 aircraft that I picked up. Okay. All right. And that's me as a major after I brought it back to Edwards and Park. And I got my hands on what is called the YAPS head. Now, that part there of the aircraft is instrumentation only. You won't find that on operational F-16s. But as you look, there's these little vanes that go with that they help provide increased instrumentation capability for both angle attack and also the side slip. And so you can see that there's a vane above it and a vane below it, and they have little veins. So depending on the yaw, they'll provide instrumentation that way, and then based on your angle of attack, that's the side. So that YAPS head is instrumentation only. An operational aircraft will not have that. But if you see that, that on any type aircraft, that is in fact a test aircraft with better instrumentation, more refined instrumentation, like data.
Yeah, and so they do that specifically for testing, though. Just to get more data and more info. Yeah,
that is really only for test purposes only. You wouldn't want that on an operational fighter aircraft, for instance.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So that's when I first brought the first GE F-110 engine back to Edwards, and the General Electric was all excited, so they wanted to have a hero picture taken of me, and so that's what that is there.
I love it.
They were nice to give me a copy. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah. Okay. So here, because most people don't know what a jet engine looks like, I thought, okay, I'm going to give you a cutaway, and so we'll go from as I'm looking at it, from the left side all the way to the back end there. So the very first section, you can see that this kind of silver section, that is what we would call the turbo fan section. And then behind that is the compressor section, some of the stages of the compressor section. And then you have more compressor section. And then in the center, you got a silver part there, and that is the combustor. And then you got these other yellow little things, and that's called the turbine section. And then it goes back to the nozzle, the afterburner section, and the leaves you can see from the afterburner. And the afterburner, the leaves will expand bigger based on the pressure that comes out when you put it in afterburner. That big silver chamber that you can see the right side there are spray rings, and So you dump fuel when you put it in afterburner. You're dumping fuel into that section there, and it will light off due to it'll light off. And when it lights off, that provides more thrust. And because of you have a lot more pressure, that nozzle needs to open up to provide that additional hot air to go out as we're looking at the right side. Because you always want the air to go always come in, flow through, and go out there, and you don't want it stopping or try and go back the other way. That's what causes compressor stalls and bangs and stagnations and all kinds of bad problems.
Yeah.
So,
that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well, so I want to show you. I'm going to show you something here. Let's see. Can you see that ring?
Yeah.
That I have in my hand. Okay. That ring, okay, is made of titanium. My wife got this for me for our 50th wedding anniversary this past June.
Okay.
This ring, the titanium, came from titanium blades from the turbine section off a GE F-110 engine.
No kidding. That is cool.
Yeah. So she's on, I don't know, she's on Facebook or whatever, and she sees this thing about a guy that says, I am building jewelry from GE F-110 engine turbine blades, titanium. And Kathy goes, oh, I got to have that.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. So she orders it, and so for our anniversary, she bought it. She bought this ring and gave it to me for our 50th anniversary.
That's
funny
awesome.
Story, my original ring was jade, and right after we got married, we were sitting around, and I slapped my hands together like this, and my Air Force Academy ring smacked into the jade ring, and the jade shattered.
Oh no.
Yeah, it just shattered. I mean, my wife was devastated. I was in shock. But
yeah.
So
wow.
I never had a wedding ring after that for many, many years. And so when she found this wedding ring made of titanium off of a GE engine, I said, oh, yeah. When she gave it to me, I go, man, this is obviously something I got to wear forever. So,
oh, yeah.
So that's all
right.
Just real quick here on these jet engines, just the front end, the fan section here, just kind of how you know how the air goes through it is suck, squeeze, bang, blow. The fan section sucks the air in. The compressor section squeezes it. The combustor section is where it lights off, and then the motor section is the exhaust section, which part of that exhaust is the turbine blades harvest some of the energy. And it's actually the turbine blades that drive the compressor sections. So when you're sitting on the ground in a jet aircraft, you just can't. You've got to get something to get those compressor blades going before to get it to start. Is this kind of like you just how do you start a car? You got to get a starter that'll actually get the pistons doing and cause the compression and all that. Well, it's the same thing here. So you typically have what's called a jet fuel starter, which is an auxiliary piece of equipment that's attached to the jet engine, and it has a little shaft that goes up through that gap between the compressor blades. That's just one option, and then there's a joint mechanism that'll convert the twisting go in this direction to cause the compressor blades to go this way to get the compression going. And then after you get up to a certain amount of RPM, then you add the fuel, and then the engine will light, and then it's on its own, and then the jet fuel starter disengages, and then you're off to the races. But you use that. You can use that also when you're doing air starts as well. So if you have to shut the engine down, which I did several times, you would use those jet fuel starters to help restart the engine while you're airborne as well.
Oh wow. Yeah, that would be a little scary for the engine to, to turn the engine off while you're flying.
Well, I did it. I flew over 300 test sorties where I shut engines down and restarted them. That was Well, yeah, that was part of the deal of being a propulsion, the chief propulsion pilot
Yeah.
was to map out air start envelope of where the aircraft would restart and where it wouldn't.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, and again, you'd start up at 40,000 feet, and you'd shut the engine down, and then you'd let the RPM decay down to a certain range between 25 to 40% in the Pratt & Whitney engines, and then you'd try to restart it. And if you get a start, then okay, great. If you didn't get a start, then you'd nose it on down and try a second start. But part of the safety procedures were you couldn't do those air test missions unless the lake bed was dry. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And okay,
Yeah.
so part of the procedure when I did the air start test missions, I'd take off, I'd climb up to altitude, and then I'd do a practice flame out landing on the lake bed, and then I'd climb on up, go up, and then I'd start the test maneuvers. Shut the engine down, try to get it started, and but I always had to be close enough that I could do a flame out landing. So going back to that map of Edwards, I was never 180 miles away doing no starts. I was always within gliding distance of that lay bed to make sure that if the engine didn't start, I could just land on the lay bed. And luckily, I only had to do that twice.
Yeah, and you're saying the engine wouldn't restart, so you just had to glide it in to land. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because if the engine didn't start, then on the F-16, then the other thing you had, it's got an emergency power unit, and it used hydrazine, and it would burn hydrazine, and that would turn two pumps. One of them was a hydraulic pump to give you flight controls, and the other was to give you electric, so you could actually, because it's an electric jet. Okay, everything those stick, again, those were electric signals that went to computers, and the computers then sent signals to the flight controls on what you were trying to do.
Right.
When your engine, if you in your typical electric and typical hydraulics came off of the jet engine. So if the engine was not working, you did not have hydraulics and you did not have electrics.
Yeah.
And so they had this emergency power unit to provide you with that capability for a limited amount of time.
I see. Okay.
Okay. And so as part of the air start procedure, you go up and then you check to see, okay, you turn the EPU on first. Yeah, the EPU works. Okay, great. Okay, and then now I'll shut the engine down, and now I'll go dive into the test point, altitude and airspeed and the RPM that you're targeting, like 40,000 feet at 250 knots at 25% RPM. Those three parameters is what you're trying to hit, and then that's when you would initiate the air start procedure, and then boom, worked. Okay, yep, I got an air. Yeah, it works good. Okay, boom, turn the EPU off, climb back up. Now the next test point, okay, turn EPU back on, and then shut the engine down and do your next one. And so typically, we would do 6 or 7 air starts before you run out of hydrazine, and then you'd have to come back and land and review the data and then go back up for the next round.
Wow, that's a lot. Turning your engine off.
Yeah. No. Well, obviously things get a lot quieter, and I told you I started my Air Force flying career at the Academy flying gliders. So to me, it's kind of like, okay.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
As long as the EPU was running and I had flight controls and I had enough to get on the ground, this I'm kind of making light of it, but to me, it was no reason to eject because I didn't have an engine in the F-16. Okay. Wow. Now, then out over the Mediterranean and the engine quit. Now that'd be a different story, but like a bird stuck through. That's a horse of a different color. Okay, what's the next chart? Okay, prime examples of modifications, because I talked about that. Not only do you test brand new airplanes, but after the government buys airplanes, they keep them. They'll keep them for as long as they can, and so they'll do a lot of modifications to the aircraft, whether they'll put new engines in them or they'll put new radar systems or, whatever, different types of avionics. So we integrated the GPS that we talked about. Well, then when I was there in the F-16, they were integrating what they call these lantern pods, which is low altitude navigation and targeting using infrared at night. That's what lantern stands for. Low altitude navigation and targeting with infrared at night. And so these two pods that were mounted below the fuselage, and one of the pods was a targeting pod that had the laser destination capability, and the other pod was infrared, and it provided night vision for you. So like we talked about the TAC pod modification in the F-16, that big mod that was under the F-1 that we talked about. Well, so they took that capability and they put it into two smaller pods that they put on the F-16, and that provided some great capability. I'll show you some pictures here in a second. Okay, and then fuselage mounted fuel tanks. So this airplane that we're looking, that I got a picture of here. Okay, you can see the bubble canopy, and then come down from the bubble canopy towards the wing. That section that is kind of bumps out away from the fuselage, that is not normal. I mean, typically that fuselage should be round, right? But it's got kind of like a rectangular. Those are external fuel tanks that are added to put on top of the fuselage to provide more fuel for that airplane. Now that is an that's an Israeli F-16, and so some of the aircraft that they used when they did their attacks in Iran were using these aircraft with these specially modified F-16s with these external fuel tanks. Okay, so those fuel tanks, and then you look below the wing, those gray things, that's more fuel tanks. So I mean, it's like a big flying tank, a fuel tank. They're
wanting to go long distance then.
Well, and of course that's what they needed, and so that just shows you the kinds of things we can do when we modify aircraft. That, we'll put things like informal fuel tanks on. We'll put them on F-15s as well. Different. They went on the sides of the fuselage as opposed to on the top of the fuselage like you have in F-16. Okay.
Right. Next one.
Go ahead. Yeah, next chart. Right. Okay. So here's this. This is to show you some of the modifications. If you look at the picture on the left, you can see the picture of the display on the left, and that is an infrared picture there. Okay, and if you look to the right, to the picture on the right, that is a completely different scope, isn't it? It's a different screen. Okay, so these are different. These are different blocks of F-16s. Okay. So, and so if you look on the right, you can see that on the right there, the gauges are different. If you look between his legs, that's where the attitude indicators. That the attitude indicator is the one that's about half. The top half is a light gray, and the bottom half is brown. That's the indicator that tells you, how you're doing. Your pitch, roll, and yaw, and all. Okay, it kind of does your pitch and roll, bank angle, and all that right there. Okay, and then you have your angle attack and heading and all that. Those are different gauges than what you have on the screen to the left and the cockpit on the left. So that's just showing you that what I was saying, when you get into different F-16s, they may be completely different as far as their avionics. And if you don't know how to handle them, you won't even know how to start the engines, let alone how to taxi or take off, or even talk to tower or ground control. So so that's why, to your question you'd asked earlier, you need to go through a checkout to make sure you understand how to operate, because there are a lot of different capabilities that we have with these various blocks. So when you hear them talk about, say, F-35 block upgrade, well, what they're doing is they're doing things like this, where those pilots are going to have to go back and learn what those changes were.
So real quick, like the one on the left there, it looks like it's more electronic type of things, right? Computer based, if you will. And then the other side looks like it's more dials and more of an old school look. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. You got that exactly right. Yeah. So the picture on the left is probably a lantern. Let's call it a block 40. And then the one on the right is probably that may be a block 30 aircraft on the right side there.
Okay.
That on the right looks more like, what the block 30 aircraft that I flew off the production line with the GE engine. Okay. So
now,
yeah,
what is that part? I guess I'm assuming that's a heads-up display, but what all is on that?
Yeah. So that head-up display, you can see, the big green circles and the numbers and all that. And what that'll show you is your airspeed, your altitude, your angle of attack, your Mach number. And then if your radar, if you lock on to a target, it'll give you aiming cues to your target.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what that is doing. Is that's showing you, just various information, and that's why they call it head-up display. So instead of him having to look down to see what his airspeed and all that, because you can see it's on the right there. It's down between his legs. His indicators.
Literally, he's having to look all the way down if he wanted to look down and see it.
Instead, with a head-up display, you just look straight ahead and you can stall. Okay, which it was makes it so much easier to fly an aircraft.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can only imagine. I mean, and as fast as you're going in these things as well. I mean, you talked about earlier when you were, going Mach speed at 100 what was it, 100 feet off the ground, whatever it was. 100 feet. How fast everything was going by you. I mean, you don't want to look down because it's like in a car. They say if you look down, you're driving 65. You look down, you look back up. You've gone too far or whatever. I can't remember the distance they said, but you do that in a jet, man. You may be 2 miles down the road.
Well, or maybe even more, because if you're doing 8 miles a minute, you're clipping along.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, and of course this is a combat aircraft, and you want to spend most of your time out looking at your target and also making sure that bad guys aren't shooting at you. And so the more time you can spend with your head up and down, that's better, obviously, in the long run for you, right? For obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So that helps demonstrate modifications. And also some of the what we call the F-16 real estate inside, and gets to your answer of, can you just get in an airplane and go fly it? No, you can't, because you just need to know what each of those little buttons stands for, if nothing else.
Well, yeah, that's for sure. That'd be a bad day. You hit the wrong button in there.
Well, yeah. You put. I could go off on some stories on that, but we won't for now. Okay, so so specifically on the F-16 lantern. So now you can see the aircraft, and right below where the guy is sitting, you see these long tubes. Those are the two pods, the targeting pod and the navigation pod, and that's where they were located. And that aircraft, 550, was one of the airplanes I flew on my subsystems testing. Oh. And just showing you how things, don't always, you can't think of everything. When they put those lantern pods up front, okay, what they found out was happening was that you were getting these vortexes that were coming off the trailing edge. And now go back to the tail of the aircraft and ventral fins. Okay, you can see that one ventral fin kind of poking down. Right. Okay, what they were finding out is that those lantern pods were the wake turbulence coming off those pods were causing these ventral fins to start moving, and it was causing them to crack. Okay, and causing cracking problems. So they had to do some modifications to the fairings on the lantern pods, and ultimately they came up with a new pod. So I don't even think they fly with lantern with two pods now. They just fly with one pod now.
Wow.
But that's the kind of thing, again, you learn when you start testing is, okay, yeah, we're flying along here, doing Mach 1, and okay, what's that shaking going on that I feel? Well, that's things. But now let's talk about the actual what you see in the cockpit. The picture on the left is a night vision. That's an infrared picture. Guy's flying it. That could be midnight, and he's looking. You can see how definitive you can see the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then and he's got let's see, the pitch ladder. Oh, this he's got a fly up signal. Okay, so that whatever his clearance was is the radar altimeter is saying he's dipped below the that point there. And in fact, okay, and so that shows that. And then on the right side, you can see the radar picture, and just how crystal clear that radar picture is. Okay, so those nav and targeting pods, they really provided some great capability for the pilot as far as being able to pick up the target. Much better than in the old days where your radar was just giving you this big old blob of stuff. You try to say, well, where's it at?
Yeah. Now, where are you seeing, like, where in the cockpit are these screens?
Go back 2 slides.
All right. This
okay.
one?
Yeah, that's the one. Okay. Look to the left or the right of the HUD. That's where you see them.
Gotcha.
Okay. Again, there's all these little buttons, and so around those screens, and depending on which button you push, you're looking at the radar screen, or you're looking at the nav pod, or you're looking at the targeting pod. Okay. Or you're looking at the checklist or whatever. So again, you had to know, and they don't label them, and they're multi-function displays because they do multi-functions. So if it's a radar screen, then each button does something different than if you're looking at. So yeah, I guess
you don't realize how much thought process goes into flying it. Like, I never thought about that, like all the different buttons, and you have to know it off the top of your head. I mean, it's got to be there.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, and from the head-up display combiner glass that we call it, right below that is the upfront controller where you can push buttons, and that you can actually change the radio frequencies and all that right there. So as you're looking out there, you could push radio UHF and then type in 233.7 enter. Okay, and then how the radio will change and all that.
Wow. Okay.
But when they first set that mechanized up, they had this one little switch, and you had to know how to move that switch either left, right, up, down to actually change the radios, or to change what we call the IFF, information friend, which is primarily a signal that's sent out for air traffic control. Okay.
Wow.
And so some of the initial test pilots, they were texting out on ground frequency, and they would get their what we call squawk, your IFF code. And they'd type that IFF code in there, and when they did that, instead of changing their IFF, if they didn't realize it, they were actually changing their UHF frequency, and then then they didn't know how to get out of it. So now they're not. They can't talk to anybody because whatever frequency, nobody's listening. And so it took a couple iterations of the mechanization of that upfront controller before the pilots could actually do it. What we were finding is the engineers were sitting in a lab, and they would come up with this. We think we can mechanize it this way, and then they would go give it to the test pilots, and then the test pilots would try to do stuff with us. Well, that doesn't work,
Yeah.
So we went through a couple different iterations before we got the mechanization right. But yeah, there was more than one guy that got down to get ready for takeoff and could not change frequencies to tower because his little control switch. He had it. If you didn't follow exactly, to go to UHF is up 2 and left 1. And then and then you had to back out exact same way. So if it was up,
Oh,
up,
geez.
left one, you had to go right one and down two to get back to the home. Okay, but if you, so if you didn't do that right, you were lost.
Man,
So, yeah, so we had.
That'd be rough. I don't know if I could do stuff like that.
It was frustrating. It was frustrating to say the least.
Yeah.
In
That's
the
kind of
early days.
like vehicles, cars, like the engineers, they'll design something and then the mechanic goes to get in it and can't get to a bolt. And he's like, why would you do this? Or you can't take the bolt completely out of something because the way they designed it.
Right.
I see videos like that all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So the difference between a guy sitting in a room where his desk isn't moving.
Yeah.
He doesn't have distractions, how he mechanizes it or how he thinks would be good versus when you get in, mechanize it into an operational aircraft.
Yeah.
That there's other things going on at the time. And then you want me to remember I got to go up two and over and up two and then left one to use the UHF radio. Come on, give me
while I'm flying around. Yeah.
Yeah, while I'm flying around, give me a button that says UHF, boom, and then give me the keypad, type in the frequency 233.7, enter. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. All right. So let's move. So we've talked about lantern. Okay. Okay. Now, how you control the aircraft. Okay. So the throttle quadrant is that thing on the left side there. Okay. Mm-hmm. And look at all the buttons and switches on that. Okay. Now where that throttle is, that is in the forward position. So that would be about a mil power, maybe. Mil power is without afterburner, maximum RPM without afterburner. And then when you hold that throttle, if you lift it up just a little bit, you can move it forward. And then that is what puts you into afterburner. And then it's a little detent. And so you had to pull a little bit harder to pull it out of afterburner. But to push it in, you had to put a little bit into to get it into afterburner. Mm-hmm. So that's but not only did you move the throttle, but you've got your radio frequencies, you've got the speed brake to help you slow down, you've got the radar cursor as far as running the radar, that the cursor's up, down, or out, in. So you did all that with your left hand, and then on the right hand, there's that unmovable stick. Okay, that is the controller. Okay, and you can see there's a lot of buttons on that guy too. The red button, okay, that is the nose wheel steering. Okay, so when you're on the ground, you push that button, and then when you move the throttles, then that will actually move the nose wheel left or right. So that's how you steer it. Okay.
Okay.
That is the nose, but it's also the weapon release button. So when you because when you're airborne, you don't care about the nose where it's stuck up in the fuselage. So but that's also what we call the pickle button or the weapon release button. Okay, and then you come down and there's a couple other switches, and then depending upon how your aircraft is mechanized, those two sets of switches, well, actually 3 sets of switches there are going to do different things. Okay, so instead of you having to reach forward and touch the screen, you could do some things with these. You can we call it the castle switch, and the other switch, so they're, again, I can't tell you specifically because they were all mechanized differently. And then you have the big, what we call the coolie switch. That is how you actually trim the aircraft. And I don't know if you know how you trim an airplane, but
no, I don't. I have no clue.
Yeah, so you that's with your thumb, and as you push forward or pull back or left, right, that's how you can fly it hands off. Is if you get the flight controls trimmed just right to how you want it, then you can take your hands off the stick, and it's what we call trimmed up.
I see. Okay.
So you do spend a lot of time with that little coolie switch, as far, because it's all dependent upon your altitude, airspeed, bank angle, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, but when you're cruising along, that's basically something that you try because that relieves pressure, as far as you trying to, every time you take your hand off and the aircraft wants to roll left. Okay, well, so you put in a little right. Okay. Okay. So that's the part of the cockpit for the F-16.
Okay.
So
You want to see what's next? Let's see.
yeah. Oh, by the way, yeah. So this is to tell you that many of the technologies that we were testing back in the 80s, like GPS and some of the radars that we used, the capabilities in those radars, and multifunction displays that we were developing in the 1980s, 84 through 86 timeframe. A lot of those things, the screens, all that that flows down to commercial activities. And so if you look at a Tesla a car today, a lot of that technology, the screens and the GPS integration, and then how it picks up the other traffic with those. Do you know how a Tesla it's got those sensors all around the air?
Yeah, it's basically on the corners and then a couple other places as well.
Well, those TR modules, I think, are primarily descendants of the TR modules from different aircraft radars. Or TR, transmit receive. Okay. Yeah. Transmit receive modules. So it's sending out little signals, and getting back returns, and then translating that to aircraft or cars that you see, in a Tesla car. So yeah, a lot. So my point is, I'm really interested to see what technologies that we're testing today in aircraft that are going to then to end up, our cars or our golf cart, or whatever the future, right?
Well, what I just took from everything you said just there is really Elon Musk should be thanking you for the work that you did. So I think part of his company, the price of it and how much he's made, I think some of that should go to you because you tested all this stuff.
I think so too, man. That's a great idea, Jay.
Yeah, you should hit him up and get some extra cash there.
Yeah, do you know him? Why don't you give him a call and tell him?
yeah. Let me get him on the phone for you.
Okay, let's go on to the next chart. What's the next chart here? Okay, so this next chart. Not only is it, you talk about the glamour of being airborne and flying, but you also do ground testing, okay? And so the picture on the left there, that is me looking down to see what the heck is going on. This is where I was doing ground testing. You see the wheels, and it looks like little tents or something that those wheels are on. Yeah. That was a full track system, and what you take both ends of those and wrap it around the tire and clip it. And the point was going to turn that F-16 into a kind of a modified tank that has bigger wheels. And it was for, it's called full track, and it was for air-based survivability. So let's say the bad guys come in and you're up flying, and the bad guys come in and blow up your runway. Okay, well, you come back and you need a place to land, but your runway's blown up. Well, the idea is that the bulldozers would come out and they would scrape the dirt and whatever back into the holes, and they would, if you would landed short, and I'll show you how you could land short in just a second. Then you would put those flow tracks on, and then you could taxi over unimproved surfaces, because typically, okay. And so that was to help with air-based survivability. So they would put those on the aircraft, and then they would tow me around, and the landing gear were instrumented to determine what kind of side loads and compression loads, all these different loads, those things were causing on the aircraft, to see whether it was, it was going to be safe enough to even use the darn things. Yeah. So I did, when I wasn't flying and doing air starts, sometimes I was doing, getting towed around as a glorified tank with these flow track things on my tires.
That's pretty neat, though.
Yeah, it was an interesting concept. of course, this was during the Cold War when the Soviet Union, and we were still standing toe to toe with the Soviets. And so they were looking for ways to improve the being able to recover aircraft to your home base in case it got attacked, by the bad guy. And so the second thing, the picture on the right, is a mobile arresting barrier system. And so you can see those big dark things there, and you can see kind of a dark line. That's part of the arresting system. And this is me doing barrier tests where they had those things up, and I'd put the hook down, and I'd go, at not airborne speeds, but fast ground speeds, and then see how well the hook would connect with the barrier system, and then help slow you down. And these were mobile systems. So the idea was, okay, yeah, we could take these to some austere place. We could put these things, put them down the ground, and then if it was a short runway where we were concerned about whether the aircraft could, take off or land in the amount of runway you had there, or surface, have those barriers there just as a mobile system. I mean, heck, you can put them on Autobahns thing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what that was to see. Did they functionally work with the airplanes? So we were
similar to what's on like an aircraft carrier then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's the same concept as an aircraft carrier. And so if you go to fighter bases, you will see that there are barrier systems at the approach end and the departure end, typically, but they're permanent. I mean, they're not mobile; they're there. Okay, and then depending, and they'll have this big thick cable with these little rubber donuts, and they'll be stretched across the runway. And so some will be on the front end. And so typically, what you do as a fighter is you taxi when you get clearance for takeoff, you taxi and go over them, and then after you're past them, then you'd run the engines up and take off. But then if you had to abort, then you put the throttles on, put the brakes, and whatever. And if you can't get stopped at the departure end, you put the hook down, and then you take a departure end barrier, for instance. So
I see. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
But the key was making sure that your barrier was down, or your hook was down, and that it actually was able to hit it. So, real quick story on that. When I was flying F-111s, one of the guys takes off, and his left wheel falls off. He has no left wheel, no left main tire on his airplane, and so the decision was made to foam the runway and have him come in, put the hook down, and just have the barrier stop him. Okay.
Right.
That's like a good idea. Okay. So he comes in, he has the hook down, and he's sliding through the foam with the hook down, and he ain't stopping. He ain't stopping at all. And the reason is they put the foam before the hook. Okay, or they put it, I guess, somewhere. They misplaced where the foam was versus where he thought it was, and so it wasn't.
No.
So what he does, okay, because he said, "Man, I'm not stopping," and he did not want to tip over. He was holding the wings level just with his with his ailerons.
Right.
And because he did not feel it stop, he decided, I'm going to go around. So he plugs both engines into afterburner, and he rotates. And as he rotates and he's afterburner, guess what happens? The hook now catches the barrier, and so he goes up, and the barrier. Yeah. So he's lifted off with the hook down, and the hook catches the barrier and slams him, stopped him right on the runway, but slammed him on the runway. Yeah.
Man,
that was a real interesting ride for him, let me tell you. So
well, I mean, that could break your back, I would imagine.
They were lucky to have lived through it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that could have been fatal, but
Wow.
but they were able to stop, and so they're sitting on the ground with afterburners cooking. The fire trucks, and what they did is they opened up the cockpit. Each side they opened up their cockpit, and then they just ran like hell to get out.
Oh yeah.
Aircraft, and I think it was the fire department that actually got in there and shut the engines down.
No kidding. Wow.
Down, yeah. Well, I'm sure that was a hell of a shock for him, you know, to think that he's going to do a go around and have that airplane land back on the runway.
Man,
okay, well,
that is wild. Well, yeah, we're at a stopping point. I think if you're good with stopping here,
yeah.
But I don't know about you. This is going really fast for me just because I'm having fun. So
I know we didn't even get to when I was the commander during the test programs there. So I guess we'll have to come back.
That's okay with me. It's all right. I don't mind at all. But hey, thanks for coming on and sharing these stories and telling us about your career. It's definitely one interesting career for me. I've not heard one like this at all. So I'm really enjoying it.
Well, you might enjoy hearing some of this stuff. So
yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks again to all the listeners out there. If you're struggling, need help, anything like that, don't forget the VA has some great resources. You can always dial 988, press option 1. You can always text 838-255, or you can go to veteranscrisisline.net and click on that chat icon. Any of those options will put you in contact with somebody that can help you out. But remember, one veteran life lost is one too many. I care about you. I know Robbie cares about you. The whole veteran community cares about you. So please reach out for help. And if you're out there, you're not struggling, reach out to the buddies you served with, ask them how they're doing. And if they need that helping hand, please give it to them. All right, Robbie, thanks so much. Truly appreciate it. To all the listeners out there, stay motivated, change your socks.